Hello, you are listening to Trump Republic Radio. It is August 30th, 2017. I am your host, Enzo Quesada, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Bobby Hester.
Hello, everyone.
And this week on the show, we have a topic that we've been pushing around doing for the last couple of weeks or so, and that is on societal breakdowns. Now, this last week on the Sunday show, you remember, Bobby, the United Nations actually warned the country of warning signs of a civil conflict brewing in the United States.
I remember that, yeah.
And they don't do that for many countries. I know they've done it for Iraq, Somalia, the former Yugoslav, but the United States receiving that after what happened in Charlottesville is definitely a wake-up surprise to many people in this country that we are not as unified as, we can be made out to be, that society is a lot more fragile to keep together than it appears in the United States. So this entire show we're going to go over is just the hypothetical of what a societal collapse in the United States would look like. And the example that I want to pull from this that I'm going to go over first, which I think is just a very solid hypothetical, is by Matt Bracton, who is a fiction author who wrote the series Enemies Foreign and Domestic. Now, he wrote an article called When the Music Stops, How America's Cities May Explode in Violence, which we'll put in the description of this episode. I think it is a good example of what this could look like for seeing societal collapse. Now, in the hypothetical that he goes over in his article, the United States is in some sort of cascading economic crisis. That could be through trade or hyperinflation or whatever. It could be any number of different things could lead this country into such a situation. And what would start off the violence would be, I'll backtrack a second. Say in the hypothetical that we've entered a sort of cascading economic crisis, and say all the people that are on food assistance, EBT, SNAP, and the sorts, their cards all declined when they went to the grocery stores. They just came out as errors, or hyperinflation is going so crazy that the government is just throwing digits onto the cards, but it's useless, and storekeepers can't take these cards anymore. We pulled up before we did the show, actually, how many Americans are on food stamps. You want to tell us that, Bobby?
There are currently 43 million Americans on EBT, and on SNAP is 45.4 million Americans.
So definitely not a small number. Not something to scoff at all. In the hypothetical that he draws in his article, this is actually something that's happening simultaneously in different cities. So say we enter this economic crisis and all these people on EBT all of a sudden can no longer access, the food that they need to survive. The first thing that he outlines in his article is the first step of the escalation of violence, which is flash mob looting. So this will be, people are organizing and they're looting grocery stores and whatnot because they're hungry. And at first, the average American citizen is going to see this and say, oh, that's justifiable. They're hungry, They got to do what they got to do. And the media will portray it sympathetically. And, the flash mob aspect is the thing about our current situation that in the modern world that separates us from past civil unrest. You look at the 1992 LA riots, people were swarming in the streets, but they weren't communicating through cell phones or Twitter or anything like we can do today, say, hey, let's all meet up on the street and do something. So, in the past where, say initially like in the LA riots when they attacked Reginald Denny in the streets, they went and attacked him in the streets, pulled him out of his truck. you just have dozens of people out in the streets, but with the availability of technology to communicate amongst people quickly these days, we could get hundreds or 1,000 people in the street over a different cause. It's similar to what we saw in, say, I believe Memphis and St. Louis. They had these incidents where there was these malls over, what was it, Black Friday time last year, where all of a sudden there was just mass violence going on, and apparently it was these African American youths just organizing in these malls to fight each other, and it just happened out of nowhere. They're flash mobs, but this is a reality that we see. So the first thing that we're going to see would be we're having these food riots, and they're taking the grocery stores and looting them. But that's soon going to escalate to flash mob riots. Because you see, and it's going to be articulated a lot along racial lines. You go through the article that Matt Bracton wrote, he prefaces, like, I'm going to be not politically correct when I go through this, but in the instance of it's going to happen in urban cities, it's going to mainly be minorities. And they're going to be resentful for when they don't receive their benefits anymore. So they're going to go from the looting to causing riots to try to express themselves to the system violently, their discontent, And, you look at what we've seen the past couple of years. I mean, I brought up how it happened in the LA riots, but we look at what happened in Ferguson as well. I mean, they just take to the streets and to the highways, and they just start attacking random civilians for no reason in the streets, just to cause attention. And it's going to be dangerous for those first initial people in the highway. I mean, there's no way to get away from the mob. They're going to be stopped. There's going to be some people that are going to be cautious and roll up, and then they're going to be surrounded. And when that first starts happening, I mean, the police aren't going to be able to respond quickly at all. I've been in protests where riot police have been called. It usually takes them an hour or two before they can assemble riot police and actually come up with a strategy to deploy onto the streets so they can get order. The thing with flash mobs is they can, assemble very quickly, but at the same time they can disengage very quickly in the fraction of a time that it would take the police to get ready for protests like this or mass riots. And these are things that could sprout up all across an urban city, in the case of a cascading economic crisis. And you think about the effect that this would have on the society, or the effect that this would have not on the society but the police, if they have to keep on preparing every single night to go out and stop these riots going on. You look at what was happening during Baltimore and their riots back in 2015. I mean, some of those police officers were having to go on 16-hour shifts every single day. You're not going to be able to last past like 2 weeks with your police force trying to stop these riots. It's gonna get out of hand real quickly, because, I mean, you think about it. The police are not like firefighters. They don't have barracks at their police stations. They have to go back to their homes and then head over to the police stations, then head out. It's not as rapid fire as, other emergency services. So once all these riots are getting out of hand, it's going to be hard to get responses from police because... I'm sorry, I'm a bit off track.
Well, while you're looking that back up, I just wanted to mention that there is an example of something like this happening. Going back to the first part you said about if food stamps or EBT cards all of a sudden don't work, the rioting and the looting that comes from it. Back in 2013 at Spring Hill, Mansfield and Spring Hill in Louisiana, there was a Walmart there that had a technical glitch, which made it so that nobody was able to use any food stamps or EBT cards there at that time. And within 2 hours, they said the entire store was pretty much completely looted because people just went crazy and started stealing everything. In fact, the Spring Hill police chief, Will Lind, said that they were even called in to help the employees at the Walmart because there were so many people that were looting. And the police chief then even said, it was worse than anything we had ever seen in this town. There was no food left on the shelves and no meat left. The grocery part of the Walmart was totally decimated. I saw people drag out 8 to 10 grocery carts. One person even hauled away more than $700 worth of food. And that's all within 2 hours after food stamps stopped working at a single Walmart. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And if it happens nationwide,
a national
or on
scale,
a large scale, or a few cities or an entire state, everything falls apart so quickly.
And you got to think about this. Like, say you have the initial looting. Those stores aren't going to be restocked. Trucks aren't going to come in and just start filling up. The security is going to be compromised these places. If they come out into these, urban areas with... They're going to be like sitting ducks. They're going to be robbed, these trucks going out, because, food is going to become so dire. It's going to be insane. I mean, how long were those people just cut off from their EBT before they started rioting?
At the Walmart story?
Yeah.
From the time when it first started, when the EBT card stopped working, to the point where the store was almost completely out of food, was 2 hours.
It doesn't take long for these things to happen amongst, the most disadvantaged, because they'll feel righteous in what they're doing. And, I mean, who are we to say whether or not, but, I mean, this is the result when these things happen.
And that store even called the police because the situation got so bad. If you think about it, before the police arrived, there's nothing a store's going to be able to do about it. You might have one security guard at each door, but if you have a crowd of 30, 40 people rushing in there trying to loot stuff, there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing the employees can do about it. It's free reign. They're going to get away with it and do whatever they want. So once it actually starts, there's nothing that's going to be able to stop it.
So once we start seeing, flash mob riots across the city, you're going to see a lot of different effects start happening. You're pretty much going to put a halt to the local economy in the area. Businesses are going to say to themselves, like, it's not safe for us to be open. We might get looted. It's too dangerous for our workers to, make the commute out to our business. You're going to start seeing, mass looting. It's going to become commonplace. You're going to see things like carjacking become much more commonplace. I mean, we're just talking about Hurricane Harvey this last Sunday, and since then there has been the incidences where, among the looting that has happened in Houston, I mean, people that are driving their boats out to try and rescue the people are getting shot at, and they're trying to steal the people's boats.
Yeah, the Louisiana Cajun Navy even issued a warning to all their people that were there, saying, hey, this is going on. They actually told them all to stop searching for people in order to formulate a plan about what to do if they see people, like, looting and stuff. So even then, that hampers search efforts if you have a major natural disaster like Hurricane Harvey.
And also what you'll start seeing if you start having, as what Braxton calls youth urban minorities, that's going to make up the majority of your flash mobs. You look at who was in the mobs in Baltimore or not Charlottesville or Ferguson. I mean, that's just how these things normally go, because they feel so disaffected they need to lash out against the system. You're going to start seeing them take over critical infrastructure corridors in your city. They're going to start taking over highways. They're going to start taking over railroads. They're going to take over pipe and power lines. So the entire system of the city, even if you live outside of the area where these riots are happening, you're going to be cut off from access to the rest of the city as well. But what you'll start seeing, though, is all the resources in the area where they're, rioting soon going to run out. So what are they going to do? they're going to turn to the suburbs. They're going to start pushing out, and they're going to try and, start looting the more affluent people. Now, what's going to happen when that starts happening? You're going to start seeing people take justice in their own hands. You can't rely on the police to come out and save you when these mobs are coming around. I mean, after 2 weeks of this, is it going to be of any use to even call the police? They're not going to be able to respond to individuals. Policing generally works in places that actually have civility. You look at all the no-go zones we have across Europe. Okay, there's nothing that stops the mob riots that go on in, say, the no-go zones in Sweden. Okay, there is to a point that the police officers, they didn't sign up to be, fighting riots every single day. So it's going to come down to the average everyday citizens in the suburbs are going to have to defend themselves. Now, you think about it in the terms of there's tens of thousands of veterans in this country that millions. There's millions of weapons in this country. There's over 100 million AR-15s in this country. The people in the suburbs are armed. They would be ready for this, and they would have the right individuals to start maintaining themselves. It's just a matter of, can your neighborhood defend against an entire mob rushing your way? You look at, you remember the Milwaukee riots last year?
Yes.
I forget who they were rioting about, what person was shot by the police.
It was about that guy that got shot in the car, and I think his girlfriend was filming it. Was that the Milwaukee one?
That was Alton Sterling. That was Minnesota.
Okay, my mistake.
But, similar case like that. The sister of the guy that was killed, you remember CNN famously cut this off.
Yeah.
She called for them to start going to the suburbs and burn that shit down and start robbing them. So this is something that we know that they already have that mindset when these mobs start going. I mean, you fall into the mob mentality, once these mobs start seeing on TV like, oh, we can start these riots, we're not going to get in trouble. There's going to be no repercussions. It's going to empower more people to go into the streets and do it. It's going to cavalcade the effect of they see that, oh, we have so much power, no one can stop us. And at the same time, they have the desperation that there's no food or anything coming in. They're going to attack these communities. But,
well, I was going to say, I think the point that you're getting next to is resistance to that. Is that right?
Yeah, the resistance that different communities would put up, which... Bracton, he starts getting into the hypotheticals of different scenarios that these communities are going to use for their defense. He actually goes over what he thinks would become the most effective tactic to stop these mobs from, riding into their neighborhoods, which would be the sniper ambush. Because you think about it, these mobs... They're going to be mainly armed with, low to mid-range weapons. They're going to have clubs.
For the ones that even have weapons.
They're going to have pistols.
Bats.
Maybe like an AK-47 or something. But they're not going to have long-range hunting rifles. But you look at, on average, I believe it's around 40 million Americans every single year go hunting. So there's plenty of people that have the expertise and the weaponry to set up sniper ambushes so they can be so far away from these riots. And once you start firing into these crowds, they're going to disperse because, they're not going to be able to, respond in force from a distance.
Yeah, if you have a crowd of 30, 40 people armed with low-range weapons, or baseball bats or things like that, and they're coming towards a neighborhood or a store, and you have just 2 or 3 guys 500, 600 yards away just pop off a few rounds at the crowd. Several of those people go down, the crowd scatters.
Yeah. He goes over how he foresees the most effective tactic of the sniper ambush, which I thought was very interesting, where you get 8 individuals in 2 trucks. You have 2 people laid down in the back of the beds of these trucks with, your long-range scoped weapons. You put like a cover canvas over them so, they don't reveal that they're there. You put up the back of the truck, and you put sandbags around them. And then you have your driver and your spotter. So you drive along, keeping in mind where the mob is. And you put the back of the truck facing them. And you get the other truck that you also have doing that, and you put them in a 90-degree intersection. So then when you need to stop the mob, you just lip up the back of the truck. They can start firing into the mob. You're going to be hundreds of yards away. And, the way that he breaks it down is the person on the left is going to work their way from the outside of the mob firing in. And the guy on the right's going to do the same. This is going to cause a mass panic. The need for self-preservation is going to kick in. And this is going to be an effective tactic to stop mobs. It's just a matter of, the violence that's going to be at hand is going to get crazy.
And, the initial first few rounds that get shot off by the people in the trucks, the crowd is not going to know where those bullets are coming from.
Not at all.
Not at all. And even if they do figure it out, it's coming from that direction over there, to be able to figure out the exact pinpoint location of a truck 500, 600 yards away from you at that point in time, you're not going to be able to find it. You're not going to be able to fire back. And by then, even if the truck did realize, we're being shot at, they can easily just drive away at that point. And by then, most of the crowd is scattered, ran away, hid behind cover, or anything. It effectively does create it effectively does create a way to stop the crowd at that point.
Yeah, and you think about, as I was saying before, the police are not going to be there for you. Okay, they're also going to be thinking about their own families. Okay, if they're going to have to try and run away from the mass chaos that's happening. So it's going to come down to these, neighborhood vigilantes. But the thing about that is the government's going to crack down on them.
Yes.
Very, very hard. I mean, the government is the monopoly on the legitimate use of force. They don't want to have the feeling that they've lost that ability. So, they'll start going after these vigilantes. They'll start, trying to figure out who they are. Maybe they're going to use their CCTV cameras all across the city and look at the license plates, or try to photo identify who these people are. And, maybe they'll start arresting some of these people, who knows, but the vigilantes will adjust to that happening. They're going to become more covert in their mannerisms that they go about when they take these actions. If you want to see examples of that, you just look at the fighting that goes along south of the border in Mexico, where they start, stealing other people's cars when they're going to do these things, or wearing false uniforms, things of that nature. So, this can quickly get out of hand. You just need a couple cities going crazy like this, and you'll start seeing another cavalcading effect of cities that were unaffected all of a sudden going to have problems. This will probably break down...
The domino effect.
This will probably immediately break down on racial lines. I mean, that's just how civil wars usually go. Matt Bracton, he was in the Navy SEALs, and he saw firsthand the civil war in Lebanon in 1983, where Shiites and Sunnis and Christians were killing each other left and right. You can look at another example of a modern civil war, what happened in Yugoslavia, where you have the Croats and the Bosnians and the Serbs all at each other's throats. And, just prior to the violence, they were all living in peace with one another. But, you have cities all across the country that are broken upon different racial lines. White, black, and Hispanic would be the biggest groups. Every single city almost has these different combinations. When Bracton goes over what he calls minority urban youth, that doesn't have to necessarily mean black minorities. That could mean Hispanic minorities, people that are also going to be on EBT. I don't mean to stereotype with it. This is just how the violence is going to break out. People are going to feel resentful at what's happening, and they're going to lash out along these lines. So it's going to be dangerous, say, if you are someone who is a minority. This could even be a white person that lives surrounded by a majority of a different race. Those people are going to be attacked when these things start popping off. They're going to have to run out of these areas. So, these cities are going to go to complete chaos. And then it's going to end up being the ruralites versus the urbanites. How is this going to spill over into the rural areas? How are all these people that have to flee the cities, how is that dynamic going to play into when they run into the rural areas outside of these cities to try and get away from it all? Are the ruralites going to stick to their own and shun outsiders? That's very likely something that they're going to do. If they're seeing all the violence that's going on, they're not going to be willing to outstretch their hand to help out their fellow man. That's just how these things go. But, that was just kind of a brief outline of the article. You can go way more in depth than it. He goes very in depth with it, but, how long could we last with that? Eventually they're going to try and call the military to get involved, but how long can the military supplies last? These guys don't have enough food to feed everyone in the country in the span of a year. They don't have enough fuel for every single person over the course of the year. The average American has less food than they need in the course of a week to feed themselves. We're so used to having grocery stores. And, amongst minorities, they're even less prepared for a circumstance like this where, there is no food. Do you want to kind of get into some of your stuff now in terms of survival?
Yeah, well, the first thing I do want to preface is just remember that the human body can go about 3 days without water and about 3 weeks without food. However, there are many cases of people surviving longer than that, and a lot of that does have to do with, especially for the first time, is when people are running on adrenaline. Because if you're running out of food and you're out, and you're trying to find food, run around, your body is going to be using up a lot more energy than you're normally used to using, and you're going to get nervous, you're going to get scared. And adrenaline does kick in, and that is one of the things that helps keep people alive longer than a few days once they run out of water or run out of food. But what I wanted to go over is just some basic what you should do in terms of if the food supply does run out. Now, keep in mind, if you're listening, this is extremely basic. You can go online and find much, much, much better examples, much better websites to tell you what type of food you should have, how much food you should have, but I'm just going to do a basic overview. Now, FEMA currently suggests that every American should have a 2-week supply of food in their houses as in case of emergency. Now, the Mormon Church out of Utah suggests that every American should have a 3-month supply of food. Now, that's very, very difficult and expensive, especially since you consider a lot of the food you're going to have will start expiring, so it has to constantly be updated. Now, what I personally suggest is have about a month to a month and a half, maybe 6 weeks worth of food that you should have. That would be my suggestion, because if unless the situation that causes society to break down is so severe to the point where it's lasting for months, things will start to get better after a while. Government response will kick in, especially for military or National Guard. Riots will eventually get put to rest one way or another. And it does take a long time for society to come back to the way it was.
It might never go back to the way it was. That's the thing. I mean, we're talking speculatively on a societal breakdown in this country that maybe irrevocably never could be repaired.
And there are so many factors at play that even forgetting one thing could change the entire outcome. So that's why we just have to we have to make the best estimate with the information that we are provided. Now, so that I suggest personally that everyone should have about at least 6 weeks worth of food, just in case things get better. Because even if you're someone who does have 3 months worth of food supplied, if there's a situation going on for 3 months, you're going to run out of food too. And you're going to be in the same situation as everyone else.
And that also, I'm going to kind of jump back to what I was saying with the Vigilantes. Some thoughts are coming to my head. But they're going to be protecting their neighborhoods. But you can't sit there forever. You also need more resources.
Right.
Eventually, they're going to have to go on the offensive. They're going to have to try and acquire more resources, try and deter these riots to go farther away, claim territory. It's not only going to be the people on EBT that are going to get very desperate for resources very quickly. It's going to be your average American as well.
And those people in those suburbs and those neighborhoods, they're going to turn on each other too.
Yeah.
If they find out that someone there has a good supply of food, they're going to come after them. Yeah. And houses are going to get robbed, and it's not going to be good for them either if something like this happens. So even though at the beginning they probably would band together knowing, okay, it's an us versus them scenario, eventually that breaks down too. So one of the other things I did want to mention is that, the personal amount of food that everybody needs varies depending on your age, by your height, by your weight, by your sex. So it's definitely not the same for every single person. But one thing people do need to realize is that if there's a scenario like that that's going on, you're going to have to ration your food. You're not going to be able to eat the same amount of food that you currently eat. I mean, Americans eat so much food as it is. You're really going to have to start cutting that down. If you have like a can of soup, instead of having everybody in the house gets a can of soup for dinner, you have one can of soup for the family for dinner. Maybe not necessarily that bad, but eventually it will get to that point if help does not arrive. But unsalted foods especially are highly suggested because they will not make you more thirsty. And water is another thing that you're going to have to keep around. But some of the things that I do suggest is rice, canned foods, gallons of water, powdered milk, and peanut butter should be things that you should stock up on your survival shelf. Now, 2 tablespoons of peanut butter a day, which is about 1 per meal, because at some point you're probably going to stop having 3 meals a day, let's just be honest. But have about 1 tablespoon of peanut butter per meal. That is a very good source of iron for the body. It also tastes good too. Now, a single regular jar of peanut butter has around 25 to 30 tablespoons in it, so that should last you about 2 weeks and provide you with enough extra calories or iron or whatever that your body might not necessarily be getting from the food that you're eating. If you have coffee grounds, that's something that you can store for years in your freezer. You stick coffee grounds in the freezer, some say that can last up to 10 years. And I know a lot of Americans are addicted to coffee, and it's going to be very, very hard to get off of your current food habits that you have. So you might as well at least, have that stuff available to you at the same time. Coffee can also be something you can trade with other people. If it gets to the point where bartering and trading becomes a necessity to get supplies in order to survive, if you're the guy who has coffee and you're the last guy who has coffee in the neighborhood, they might try to steal it from you. They might try to kill you for it. At the same time, you can say, hey, I will trade you for something else. And when people get desperate, they're more willing to make those offers. But also DIY trail mix that people make with like M&Ms and like peanuts, cashews, raisins, that sort of stuff. That is a very good source. That stuff keeps for a very long time. It's cheap. It's tasty. It's easy to carry around. It's also easy to figure out how much portions of that you need. I know a regular portion's about maybe a fistful of food, but that's also good. Now, dry beef jerky is something that you probably should also be storing because it keeps for a very long time. I mean, Native Americans have been drying their meats for hundreds of years, and it worked. And so that is something that you have. Don't try to get like name brand beef jerkies because that has a lot of extra chemicals and stuff in it that's just not good for you. But if you have like just kind of basic beef jerkies that you can get at stores, that is something that's suggested. Now, that's pretty much the basics of food that I wanted to go over. Now, in terms of water, again, water is going to be varying between people, but water is going to be probably the most highly sought after thing, even more so than food, if you have a scenario where society breaks down. Because water is used for everything, from not only just drinking water, but even bathing, you're going to need it. If you're trying to use the bathroom or the toilet, I would suggest people learn how to start digging in their backyards if it has to get to that point. If your water supply shuts down and you suddenly can't flush the toilet, you're not going to be able to use that toilet. But water is definitely something you should have. I know they suggest people have like 64 or so ounces of water per day, I think is the current recommendation. In a survival scenario, you might have to cut that down, or you might end up needing more depending on how active or whatever you are. So I'm just going to keep that with the recommendation, 64 ounces of water per person per day. That goes by very, very fast. I mean, a gallon of water might last you 2 days for a family if you're lucky at that point.
If you really ration it.
And you're really, really rationing it at that point.
I mean, if you live in like a place like Texas like us, I mean, that's not going to be enough for you.
And and natural sources of water, people are going to start clinging to those too. I mean, here in San Marcos, we have a river. I wouldn't, theoretically speaking, if a scenario like this happened, people would go to the river to try to fill up gallons of water. It might not be the cleanest, but you can boil water in order to make it, more sanitary to drink. And so water is definitely something that it's going to be in high demand of at that point. Now, I mentioned demand because supply and demand creates an economy. And even though the United States economy or economy of your city or your state or your region might break down in a scenario, economics is still an important factor here. If it gets to the point where the value of the US dollar is worthless, forget about it. Just, use that stuff for firewood if you have to. But other things will start to have value to it. Like I said, water is going to be sought after. Food is going to be sought after. Other things will as well. Chocolate bars. People love chocolate. And chocolate isn't the healthiest thing, but you're still going to need sugars. You're still going to need sweets. People are still going to want to eat that sort of stuff in that scenario. If you've got a chocolate bar and you're willing to trade, people will be willing to trade a lot of food for that. So chocolate bars are something you can save up as long as it doesn't melt. So people in Texas might be screwed if that happens and your air conditioning doesn't work anymore. If there's no electricity, and that's an entire other story by itself. But like I mentioned before, coffee grounds. That should be something you should have. But yeah, food, water, especially ammunition as well. I know we haven't really talked about ammunition much here, besides people, when we talked about the sniper ambushes. But ammunition will also be in high demand because a lot of people do have thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition, but not everybody does. And that stuff runs out quick if you're actually in a scenario where you have to use it. It doesn't, it goes away fast. But one thing that people do forget a lot about that is a very high demand item would be cigarettes. Because people that smoke are going to continue to smoke. And you know what happens if a person who smokes regularly doesn't have access to cigarettes.
You're irritable. That
goes very, very bad. And if you're the person who has cigarettes, those individual ones, I mean, look at like prison economies. Prison economies, cigarettes are very, very highly demanded, and you can get a lot to trade for cigarettes. So even if you're a non-smoker and you're against smoking, you think it's bad, whatever, if you do want to prepare for a situation like this, I would suggest buy a few packs of cigarettes at minimum, keep them in your apartment, keep them in your house, never use them. If you ever have to use them in terms of like trading and stuff, then you have them, and you will be so thankful that you spent the however much a pack of cigarettes is nowadays. I don't even know. You'll be so thankful that you did it. But again, that does play a target on your back if people know that you have them. So it's just one of those things you have to balance this sort of stuff. And that's pretty much the very, very minimum basics of what I wanted to talk about in terms of food and tradable items in talking about today's episode.
Yeah. I think I just want to bring it back a second to some of the stuff I was saying earlier. I was just, going over some thoughts in my head, and, you bring it back to the military. In the case of the military needs to, by force, say, put down these vigilantes, you're likely going to get situations where the military is going to be called to disarm the populace. Now, this is something that happened in Hurricane Katrina. I actually have a pretty close friend of mine who was in the air. He was airborne, I believe. He was actually ordered to take weapons from the citizens in New Orleans, and
Really?
They weren't taking weapons from the places that were that were hit by the hurricane. They're going to the high ground where the wealthy people were, and they're taking the weapons away from them. So the government will be trying to disarm its own citizenry that will prevent themselves from being able to defend themselves from the home invasions, from the looting, from the mob violence. It's going to get bad, okay? In this country, we have a pretty strong love of our military. But you look at the history of how that's gone, we've had periods where we've hated the military as well. If the military started taking guns away from people, it's going to become open season. There's going to be reprisal of attacks upon, the military if they start doing this. And, in the same sense, this will also happen against the police. People will start targeting their families if they start doing these things. And there's also going to be people in the military that are just going to desert. There's going to be people in the police force that are going to desert. They're not going to stand by and, they swear an oath to the Constitution. They're going to refuse to do this in some instances. But for the most part, if the order comes to take weapons from the populace, they're going to listen. The government wants to save itself in a situation like this.
The government would, but if you had a scenario where the government was ordering the military to start confiscating weapons, I do have a feeling where a lot of the military would start to disobey and would desert over that, because the military is highly against sort of stuff like that. Just your average everyday soldier, airman, sailor, marine, they're not going to put up with that stuff. And the reason I bring that up is you might be successful at the first house, but, like you said, people target the military. You might be successful at the first house.
You're going to start an insurgency.
But word gets out that the military is confiscating people's guns. Regular people who love the military, if they see a group of soldiers walking down the street, come into their house, they're going to fire through the door before they even ring the doorbell.
Yeah.
And so, in my personal opinion, I don't think that a full-scale gun confiscation would ever actually be successful in this country. And once you start hearing stories...
But some cities might try and do it.
Local scale, it might actually happen. But in terms of wide national scale, it would absolutely never be successful. Because, think if you're a police officer who lives in San Antonio, and you've heard that in Houston they tried to start ordering people to confiscate weapons because of mass riots. And there's an average of 4 or 5 cops that are getting killed every single day trying to do this. Are you really going to want to do that when that order comes down to you, knowing that the chance of death is so much higher? Imagine if, not everyone, obviously, not everyone's going to shoot at the cops if they come to their house and say, give us your guns. But a lot of people are going to, and I feel like more people than you think would actually do that. If you're a police officer and you start realizing that your buddies are getting killed left and right doing this, you're not going to do that either. Same thing goes for military. So I do have to disagree with you on that one point. Small scale, a few houses, a neighborhood might be successful, but if that starts happening in a large scale, there's going to be heavy resistance. It's going to fight back. It's going to be unsuccessful, and the military police are not going to do it at all.
Because the thing is, the government is going to go after the vigilantes hard, and the media is going to portray them as domestic terrorists, without question. So, you're going to get a situation where you're going to create an insurgency in these neighborhoods or in these cities where, the government, whichever faction of its enforcement you want it to be, the police, the SWAT, the military, they're going to have to take on an insurgency that is much more capable than, say, what we've seen in Iraq or Vietnam or Afghanistan, okay? That we have so many veterans in this country. We have so many people that are trained with guns. Okay, we have a level of high agency in this country that is unmatched. You look at what was happening in Northern Ireland. It just took a couple thousand IRA members, and they could keep the entire British military swamped for a decade. They're not prepared for this fight.
And not only that, you mentioned earlier about how, police are going to get targeted first before any National Guard or military, whoever, get called in. And so, if your police force breaks down, like you said, you're getting called 16-hour shifts.
In New Orleans, they had to disband their police force.
Exactly. If the police force disbands, those people are going to go back home. A lot of them do live in the suburbs. They're probably going to be the ones joining.
They'll be sympathetic.
Sympathetic,
you're going to get situations where they're going to, when they're off the clock, go join these vigilante groups.
Yeah, so when they're on the clock, the amount of actual going after those vigilante groups probably isn't going to be their top priority at that time.
And you're also going to start seeing, the cops are going to give tip-offs to these vigilante groups if they're sympathetic to them when the mobs are going to come around. Or maybe, in another instance, maybe the vigilantes, they have some very technologically capable individuals, and they're just, hacking into the communications between officers and figuring out where they're coming around, be it the mobs or the police officers. You're going to see a level of sophistication amongst these vigilantes.
You just get a guy to fly a drone up in the air. You can see everything.
And, these aren't going to be things that are going to start up immediately.
No.
But, in some neighborhoods, it would only take them, a couple hours to organize, some sort of community watch of this sort. In a couple days when things get really bad, they're going to get organized and they're going to get sophisticated about it.
If you look back at Hurricane Katrina, even though everything was flooding and people were evacuating, it was kind of chaos. For the first 2 days, it was relatively peaceful. The looting and the chaos and the violence started after the third day. And, if you look at Hurricane Harvey, we're now on the third day. And it looks like it hasn't been too bad, all things considered. But who knows what tomorrow is going to bring. We do have those stories of some of the looters shooting at the Cajun Navy. But even that was small, all things considered.
There's been a lot of stores that have been looted as well,
There have been.
though.
And so, the longer things go on, the worse it gets. At the beginning, let's say it's just a couple of stores, SNAP or EBT cards stop working. Okay, fine. We have that story of out of Louisiana where that store stopped and within 2 hours all the food was gone. But all the other stores around the area still worked. And so, for the most part, if people can't get to it, they'll go to another store. It's when that store stops working and the other store stops working, suddenly none of the stores work. Then you have a day or so of, okay, maybe this will get resolved. And then a couple days later, you realize this isn't getting resolved. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't start immediately, even though in some cases there are some immediate reactions. The biggest and worst parts of it will be several days away once that sort of stuff does actually begin.
And, everything that we're talking about is hypothetical, which is why, it's hard to be definite about this sort of thing. But I really don't think it's outrageous as it may sound to talk about situations like that. The country is very divided.
Yeah.
You can feel it in the air. There's a soft civil war going on. The differences amongst political lines is nothing I've ever seen before in my short life. The racial tensions in this country aren't very good either. And, there's a lot of debt in this country. There's what, like $20 trillion of debt?
$20 trillion in debt.
Where's that going to be in a decade or two? Okay, we can't indefinitely push this stuff off. There will be a day of repercussions where the government just can't pay out these EBT cards anymore. Which is why I focus on the EBT cards, because I think that would be a very easy way for such violence to start. And it would be something you'd see all across the country. You know, I don't want the United States to break down, but it could. I mean, I don't know. I'm rambling a bit, but do you have a point, Bobby?
Well, I was going to say, you brought back the point of, like, the media would brand people as, like, terrorists or whatever. What media would be left? If people, one of the things we haven't even mentioned yet is just the power grid of the country. If that goes down, it's over. I mean, there's nothing you can do. I mean, then there's no internet access at that point. You have no electricity. Just imagine trying to live your life without electricity. I mean, people freak out after just a couple of hours. Imagine a major city, electricity goes out.
I mean, there are examples of this. You look at the 1977 blackout in New York City. I forgot how long that lasted. Could you look that up for me?
1977?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
But there was a citywide blackout in 1997 in New York City, and I'm waiting on that number. But, once the power went out, it wasn't that long until there was mass criminality.
2 days.
It was only 2 days. I remember it wasn't that long of a period. But in 2 days, all of a sudden, you started seeing mass looting, mass rioting, because people freak out.
The power went out at 8:37 p.m. on a Wednesday, and by 9:36 p.m. on the Thursday the next day, they started restoring the power. So it was 24 hours, pretty much.
Yeah.
Or 25 hours, if you want to be specific.
But the thing is, when you come into a disaster situation, such as, say, the power goes out, you have no idea when or if that will be restored. So people are going to react like it's the end of the world, even if, just in this situation, the power is restored a day later. You're still going to see people, fall into the mentality of trying to, secure their own existence. I don't know. It's crazy, and say we fell into some sort of economic crisis, as I am describing, that would cause us to fall into such chaos. It could last years. We could spend years before we get order restored. And, what comes after that? Are we just going to always be a sort of warlordish anarchy? I don't know. Are we going to break into local regional factions? I don't know. I mean, the United States, it is something of an empire, What connects us in Texas to California? We're part of the American empire. We really don't have anything in common with them. And I think that's the sense that we're starting to feel in this country now more than ever. There's just differences amongst us that, are we can't reconcile these things.
I mean, just look at the difference between the definition of a country and a nation. A country is like borders, a government. A nation, however, is like a group of like-minded people who share a same culture, or same language, same religion.
The Kurds are a nation.
But they are not a country.
They don't have a country, though.
And so,
So the United States is not a nation. We do not have a defined people. And, we're barely a country, Under Obama, we weren't really a country. I mean, we didn't have borders or anything. And, Donald Trump's trying to fix that, but say in the future, after Donald Trump, we have some sort of Democrat president, and he just opens the floodgates. That's what kind of scares me at the end of the day.
Yeah, so anyways, the whole point is that, but in terms of a nation, like a group of like-minded people who share like a same heritage, a same background, or whatever.
Some sort of identifier identity.
Those people, even if you don't exactly know that someone's like in the quote-unquote same nation as you. You know by talking to some people, and you know who's not in your quote-unquote nation. And so that leads to levels of trust and distrust, especially if society breaks down. You're going to see a group of people, you're going to know, are these, people more like me or not like me? And that little thing alone is going to lead to trust issues. So, yeah, that's part of what you're saying. It breaks down on racial lines, but even within racial lines, I kind of lost my train of thought, but, people will start to group together and they will start to distrust other groups who aren't them.
Yeah, and the thing is, you might see alliances formed along racial lines. We saw this in Yugoslavia. The Serbs and the Croats, for a time sided with each other. But when it was advantageous for one group to, try and subjugate the other, they turned on each other. It's something else. And I think one way that we're kind of seeing that we're losing as a country, who we are as a unified people, is the stuff with the statues. We're losing our sense of, a shared history. Because it's not only limited to the Confederate statues, okay? People are calling for Thomas Jefferson to be torn down as well. And
Vice had that article saying, let's blow up Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. And I think that, in a sense, is coming with, the decline in the white population. I mean, just for a lot of African Americans, they don't see anything that connects them to our founding fathers because they're not like them. They always talk about they want history that represents them. We're starting to get this sense that, we don't have a shared history. And now we're seeing kind of a lot of friction, amongst, there's a lot of people that feel like their heritage is being destroyed. It's being taken away. In the future, say you're someone that supports the Confederacy. You have heritage where your ancestors were part of the Confederacy. Okay, they tear down these statues. You never get to show your children these statues. They lose that sense of who they are. It's crazy. And I don't know. I kind of, while we were talking about this, I did remember one thing. We had our interview with Simon Roach of the Sadelanders, and he was preparing for a civil war, which he predicted would happen within the next 5 years, but likely within the next 2, and very likely even still this year. Okay, you look at how society in South Africa is breaking down. It's really bad, and I mean it once was the most modern society in all of Africa, and it's going. What's stopping that from happening here? I've met Simon Roach many times in person. You have what just once, but one thing that always stuck out with me was Simon when we were in Austin with him. He said, I can see the same warning signs of societal collapse here in the United States that I have seen in South Africa. So, this is not something I'm trying to be paranoid about. It's just something that you got to be aware of. I don't know. I don't have much more in the way of points that I really want to make out, just other than this is a possibility that we have to keep in mind, and who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? And again, this could be something that never happens. Who knows? Could be something that happens next month. Who knows?
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things you just have to prepare for it.
And if there was a societal breakdown or a civil war of sorts in the United States, it would be the biggest one in the world. In world history.
And I have a feeling that would have worldwide repercussions as well, because just look at global economics. Everything relies on each other at this point. If the U.S. breaks down, every other country on earth is going to start to break down as well. It's not going to be able to sustain, especially European countries that are so similar to the U.S. and so tied together, we already see that their societies are starting to crumble as well at a faster rate than ours.
Yeah, we've talked many times in the show before about Sweden, and there's predictions from the UN that Sweden will enter third world status by 2025, 2030. It's really bad there right now, and it's really bad in a lot of European countries, okay? Germany is not on a good path either. I don't think France is on a good path either. I don't think the United Kingdom is on a good path either. I don't think Italy is on a good path either. And I think we're going to see it in Europe before we ever see it in the United States.
Definitely.
But it's going to take a lot of people by surprise when Europe starts going, because they see it as this constant. But it isn't. They're just as, vulnerable to collapse as we are. And, it's in essence, like, we see, like, the civilizational collapse in front of us. We live in a society that is so preoccupied now with, we gotta have transgenders in our military. We're preoccupied with decadent things. We're not focused on things that are concrete anymore. We have a huge part of our society here in the United States, our citizenry, that see themselves as citizens of the world and see no attachment to their country whatsoever, and just think that we should flood the country with as many immigrants as want to come here. I get into many arguments with people on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, you name it, that contend that it is everyone in the world's right to come here. Who's to say we're not going to fall into instability because of that? I think that could easily be another way that we could, crumble. I don't know. We've been going for...
We're about an hour.
Just over an hour. We've been kind of, we had some prep for this, but we are just kind of freeballing, talking conversationally about this. But you think any final statements you want to make, Bobby, on the topic?
Well, besides what I said earlier about just always be prepared. I mean, that's like the first rule of the Boy Scouts, right? But yeah, just prepare for it in case it ever happens. Do what you can. I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this probably at least have watched some sort of prepper shows or stuff like that. Some of those people are pretty crazy, but the idea is still kind of there, is right, that in case something happens, you should be prepared. But just the last point that I did want to make is if society does start to break down, the death toll is going to be extremely high, extremely fast.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that...
I think we're going to see the highest death toll in the urban inner city areas.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's where the stuff's going to start. That's where the death toll is going to happen.
Places that, prior to the conflict that we're describing, would actually be a terrific place to live.
Yeah.
Could very easily become its own living hell. But I guess for me, just sort of final statements on this topic, it's not just, I don't think, preparing in terms of, say, just supplies, but it's maintaining, weapon mastery, being ready to actually defend yourself. It's maintaining close bonds with your own community, so in the case that something happens, you have each other's back. Over what associations you do that over. Is it, a militia? Is it a shared political group? Is it just your neighborhood watch? I don't know. Is it just your family? I don't know. But it is important to establish your community now rather than be the individual when this happens. Because people are going to form groups, and if you are by yourself, you are going to be a target.
And that's probably one of my biggest fears as well, is that, if something happens and I'm not around my group and I can't get back to them in time. But, again, I don't think if something like that did happen, I don't think it would be an immediate uproar. You'd see a slow decline before it really, really gets bad. So you would, even if you're late to the game, you would have at least some time to prepare or do whatever you can to survive. But that's my biggest fear personally.
Yeah. We could talk on this topic really for quite a while, but I don't want to drone y'all on with just my incessant ramblings
this
so much.
This could definitely be something we could come back for another midweek episode.
I do think so.
Specifically looking at something else like maybe weaponry or more survival type skills as well in the future. But just almost this is kind of an overview, really.
Yeah. But with that said, I don't have too much more to go into. Want to close this out, Bobby?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. Again, we're going to put the link to that article that we told you about.
It's a really, really good read. I recommend
it will be in the description. But also, we're still open to hearing any comments, questions, or concerns. We'd love to hear from you. So please email us at trumprepublicradio@gmail.com. And we're also still accepting donations at paypal.me/trumprepublicradio. We're still looking to expand the show and possibly have some merchandise as well.
Which would probably be T-shirts. That's probably the easiest thing.
We're thinking about making some Trump Republic Radio T-shirts, but we can't do that without an initial
support for
financial backing. So
we still have the Sunday show as always coming on.
Yeah, this week. Seems like this week's been fairly slow in terms of
quiet
news so far. It's pretty much just been responses to Hurricane Harvey. I mean, Trump was in Texas.
He was in Austin.
One of my friends works at the Austin airport. He Snapchatted me a picture of Air Force One sitting on the tarmac.
I wish I had stuff I needed to do, but I could have drove to Austin to see Donald Trump. I just didn't know where he was. And I knew he was only going to be there for like 2 hours.
Yeah, and he's in Missouri right now today. He gave his speech on tax reform, but we're going to talk about that in the Sunday
on Sunday. But stay tuned for the Sunday show, and thank you for listening to another episode of Trump Republic Radio.
Goodbye, everybody.
Have a good one.